How on earth could a little local difficulty with subprime mortgages in the United States unleash an economic tsunami big enough to obliterate some of Wall Street's most illustrious names, to force nationalizations of banks on both sides of the Atlantic, and to bring the entire world economy to the very brink of recession, if not downright depression? What's more, I want to reveal financial history as the essential backstory behind all history. Banks financed the Renaissance, while the bond market decided wars. Stock markets built empires, and monetary meltdowns made revolutions. From ancient Mesopotamia right down to present-day London, the ascent of money has been an indispensable part of the ascent of man. Today, we're quite happy with paper money. Even more amazingly, we're happy with money we can't even see. Millions of dollars pass through this woman's hands every day. Or rather, across her computer screen. She's a foreign exchange dealer whose business is literally buying and selling money. Each day, around $3 trillion changes hands in transactions like these around the world.
Money, shares, bonds, property titles, college degrees. If these records disappear, we disappear from society. In the past, those who resist baptism were abandoned in the wilds to live like animals. Removing all these records is a sentence to wander from one place to another without any power, exposed to any abuse, like any abandoned animal, as already happened in Argentina in 2001 due to the Corralito. Our entire existence relies on these records. In this digital era, data is stored in clouds or network of data centers. Therefore, we must study these information infrastructures, how they look like, what should we expect from them. Today, this critical data, capable to stand empires or finance wars, are placed in common containers, handled by archaic monsters similar to first computers, demanding an army of people to accomplish the most simple task. In that situation, with such inadequate and exclusive means, it is very easy to infiltrate errors without remedy. During this presentation, we will research how to assemble those machines in compact units to industrially produce the adequate means capable to best distribute and organize these records, making these errors impossible. Please join us in this journey to the heart of the internet to discover all those secrets that nobody is talking about.
And it means that doctors will be able to talk to other doctors, hospitals to other hospitals all across the country instantaneously.
this is good news for patients, because the record of computerisation in government departments has not been exactly unblemished, has it?
Patchy.
Rather more than patchy. There's the fiasco of the passport office, where the new system led to, I think it was sort of a backlog of 500,000 applications. There was a criminal records bureau, where the new system led to schools being short of teachers. It cost £150 million more than it should have done. There was air traffic control delivered years late. There was a national insurance one, which led to a backlog of 14 million unprocessed files, you know, and left some pensioners without their money.
Yes, well, please don't go on. I mean, it's tedious. I mean, I think you're being very, very selective here.
Well,
if I may say so. I mean, you could have mentioned the individual learning accounts, immigration and asylum, at magistrates' court, which links all the magistrates' courts in the country together.
yes, but that cost twice as much as it should have done.
Well, you may say that, but the real point is that with these projects I've just enumerated, we haven't had any problems.
Why not?
Because they've all been abandoned.
Yes, but some of the firms who were involved in these failed systems are now being given new government contracts, aren't they?
Well, they are, that's true, but I mean, there is a principle, and I've followed it all through my life,
Yes.
that we learn most from our mistakes.
Right.
And you see, on that basis, these companies have learned an enormous...
It's going to cost, you've put £2.3 billion.
£2.3 billion
yes, I think
into it, yes.
the initially supplying and installing the equipment is going to cost £6 billion.
Yes,
It's
around that figure, yes.
Generally accepted that implementation costs between 3 and 5 times as much as the initial installation. That means a cost of somewhere between 18 billion, this is on your figures, 18 billion and 31 billion pounds extra to go on top of the original cost. See, what the NHS trusts are worried about is that if they have to pay for all this extra, the implementation out of their own budgets, they're going to have nothing left to treat patients with.
No, well, if they can't afford to treat patients, then they won't be treating patients.
No, well, but then the whole exercise will have been for nothing.
Oh, no. No, don't ever think that.
Well, there'll be lots of a lot of sick patients, won't there?
Well, there are a lot of sick patients now. And what this means is that by a touch of a button, they'll be able to find out the names and addresses and the medicines taken and so forth of all the patients that they're not being able to treat. And this is a very, very useful thing for any government to know, especially this government. Thank you.
Here, the Babbage Analytical Engine, one of the first computers ever built. It required punch card, introduced manually, a very sophisticated machinery that needs an army of people for the most simple task. To make this machine useful, it was required to assemble and coordinate all its components through what we call today an operating system. Computer engineering was born. If components are not assembled, since there is a structure of dependencies between all its functions, it is absolutely impossible to solve them, landing us to an army of people solving the very same problems 1,000 times. These data centers, or groups of computers, remind us these old machines. It is also required to assemble all components to create a compact system that automatically solve all these dependencies. Index. A cloud is a network of data centers that cooperate to efficiently distribute a large volume of content. They are used in public environments, web services such as Google Maps or Facebook, as well as private companies such as Deutsche Telekom that connect their branches to simplify control and coordination throughout the company. This presentation is structured around two fundamental questions. The first one, which is the cloud reason to be? The essence, or end goal, an orientation framework for the manufacturing. And the second one, what is a cloud? The shape, the technical description of the tool required to reach these end goals. First, Which is the cloud reason to be? Clouds are infrastructures to organize information, which means, first, to distribute data across areas, with a content-based routing working as a vessel system to reach each area. Second, inside areas, data are deposited layer by layer, from the most general context to the most specific one, allowing to pack contents behind clear labels for visibility within the area. Third, easy-to-use applications clone area by area is the way to manipulate this data. As a conclusion, cloud end goals demands a new internet model. Second, what is a cloud? Cloud standardization process to assemble this information infrastructure in coherent systems to be industrially produced for having the means out of the box capable to easy and safely manipulate large volumes of distributed contents. Eventually, the very few existing software and hardware manufacturing plants capable to produce a real solution should be packed in a new legal structure for the assembly, transforming eternal costs in hands of the competitive market dynamics to an investment plan for becoming a factory of information infrastructures. Third, infrastructure theory. The principles of harmony described by Plato in his articulation scheme theory allow the synthesis of a coherent system for these clouds. A scheme of roles organizes the recipes to implement, the DNA of capabilities of infrastructures. The very same recipes will be manufactured in different types or operation infrastructure, each one based on a dedicated framework of standard. Let's start with the first question. Which is the cloud reason to be? Clouds are infrastructures to control information. And which mathematical laws rules that information? This leads us to a research on the nature of the essential resources. To find out these mathematical laws we must obey in our design. The section is organized as follows. First, the research about the nature of essential resources, the data and the logic. Second, the research about how currently information infrastructure handle them. Finally, the conclusions, after an analysis of how to efficiently distribute and encapsulate data, landing us in a new internet model. In information infrastructures, there are two fundamental resources to be handled. The data that frame social systems structure and the logic that use that data to program behaviors. The same one all across each human activity. Every postal office do the same things with different data. Data has a distributed nature, meaning each institution should count with his own private infrastructure that encapsulates his data securely and hermetically. The only way to keep growing in an organized way is through architectures that distribute data across areas, following two principles. First, multi-layer structures that allows to apply visibility schemes. In other words, how, in each area, the data is deposited in layers, for applying methods capable to summarize all the contents of the area and the well-defined labels, for a quick and clear vision of all the contents of the area. Finding out the layering structure depends on the right modeling of the problem. It is not a design option. It comes from the nature of the problem and will determine the inheritance tree of the logic that manipulate this data. Second, fractal growth. In other words, how the structure of areas is extended in a recursive way with an associated content-based routing system that works as a vessel system to reach each area. Logic has an organic nature, meaning applications are easy to use if they are able to automatically link one operation with another. Otherwise, we must fight with an endless bunch of tasks just to get the most simple job done. How to do complex things if the simplest ones require millions of manual interventions, in addition to the always present technical support to help us with such mess of programs to execute. A logic organically integrated is about the orchestration and choreography of all the required operations to complete all stages of a life cycle in a compact way, providing very simple control. The cycles consist on, first, a stable architecture. The design must be based on a well-known integration architecture or archetype, allowing to easily handle the life cycle as a coherent whole, making possible for the infrastructure to massively articulate these cycles to create complex systems. Integration establishes a scheme of roles, what to be done on each stage. For instance, product distribution cycle has selling points. If you do not contemplate the entire distribution cycle as a whole, there is no way to know which features must be implemented by all selling points. As a result, you get a bundle of incomplete models, one for each specific shape, in this case a bundle of incomplete selling points. They will never be a solution. Each shape will demand its own independent maintenance, not mentioning all the difficulties to automate the interactions with the other stages of the cycle, since they are incomplete models. Second, dynamic behavior. The same architecture is constantly differentiating itself by incorporating more and more capabilities to face the new scenarios that life brings. To keep a constant evolution, the logic must be developed from a single common development infrastructure in constant evolution, a single updating framework invisible to the user, with all the required testing structure. A progressive differentiation is only possible if it is done for the whole cycle together and based on generic functions such as generic selling point. Templates tailor specific functions from the generic base, such selling point, for food or electronic components. In this section, we will see how these essential resources are being managed. We will realize that our information infrastructures are moving exactly in the opposite direction to the nature of that fundamental resources, leading us to an eternal dependency with technology. The data is centralized instead of distributed. Data is stored in common containers without growth schemes and content-based routing throughout the contents. A mess where errors are very likely to happen, and also almost nobody can afford to have his own private data infrastructure, so they must use these promiscuous and obsolete containers, losing all their privacy. The end result are patchwork data structure, very difficult to control, therefore totally insecure, no matter the security attempts to prevent a poor encapsulation. Logic comes in fragmented solutions instead of organic ones, produced by a competitive development ecosystems that do not reach efficiency thresholds, since it is very difficult to assemble end solutions from a bundle of incomplete pieces that are not conceived to be part of a general scheme of capabilities. Consequences: eternal dependency. The evolution of an infrastructure that do not obey the mathematical laws imposed by the nature of his essential resources lead us to the mythological Sisyphus punishment, eternally rolling a massive boulder to the top of a steep hill that will always roll down to start over again. For two reasons: data without growth schemes and routing capabilities across the contents means you must rely on big budgets to operate the infrastructure for you, and the errors will be very likely to happen without remedy. Logic developed in a fragmented way produce incomplete models. In incomplete models, some roles are missing, therefore it will never be a solution. For instance, if it is required to have a dedicated content-based routing plane, but it is missing, it will be impossible to acquire all routing capabilities required to address all circumstances. As a result, We will always fixing the routing capabilities without leaving that condition until a dedicated routing plane is finally included. We can find this situation in software-defined networks. No combination of routing protocols succeed until the missing dedicated control plane was finally included. To avoid this eternal dependency with technology, a new internet model is a must, where each user has his data stored safely in their own data centers, coordinated in real time, following privacy and security standards, without ever losing control of his business. These groups of computers, or data centers, will finally be reduced in size, replacing those archaic monsters for modern devices. Private clouds are the only solid foundations for the development of very easy-to-use applications, not requiring any technical assistance, automatically updated from a single development center. Infrastructures are like orchestras. We have to train the musicians, stand the auditorium, build the instruments, write the scripts, control the rhythms. A huge synthesis of tasks. What happens if foundations are not properly established? Data without growth schemes and a logic unable to provide end solutions. Keep us always in the very same page, solving the very same problems 1,000 times, with a progressive degradation. The infrastructure begins to crack underfoot, with no alternative but abandon, with all the investment. The cost of a start over again is unthinkable. Without a scheme of roles and capabilities, without a north, an impossible risk, and always taking care of all the non-working legacy. Eternal maintenance costs and frustrations where errors over critical data are very likely to happen, such bank accounts or property titles. The only way to avoid this situation is by industrially supplying private and hermetic distribution infrastructure as solid foundation for a common development infrastructure capable to provide compact and coherent applications conceived from a well-defined integration architectures capable to choreograph and orchestrate the different life cycles as coherent wholes, very easy to use. Today, the role of this single root development infrastructure is taken by disaggregated open source attempts, not designed to be integrated. In order to do not depend on an army of technical staff to run our businesses, logic should just work, instead of a patchwork quilt of incomplete models, unable to evolve, difficult to use, and each one demanding his own maintenance systems. It is required to provide organically integrated logic from a single operating system. These goals can only be achieved by decoupling the production of the applications from a single development center from the distribution through private clouds, responsible first, cloning the logic throughout the areas. Second, apply access policies from the logic plane to the local data. Third, apply customized cooperation schemes between logics. Private clouds must coordinate all the stages of the application distribution lifecycle. Each stage is performed by an independent stratum. Stratum 3, the distribution throughout areas, controlling threads of services and repositories to apply growth and accessibility schemes to the data, as well as cloning and cooperation schemes between logics. Stratum 2, the deployment in each area. Install services and repositories in a secure and hermetic manner over the group of computers of each area, in other words, over the data center. Stratum 1, the execution in the computer, the final handling of the application by end user. Problems such as security can only be solved stratum by stratum to finally integrate them into a single compact structure to achieve, first, automatically resolve all dependencies between stages of the distribution cycle. Second, build a single, very easy to use control system for the entire cloud infrastructure. In the previous section, we have just answered the first of the two questions. the essence. Which is the cloud reason to be? To distribute data across areas with visibility and growth schemes and clone integrated logics throughout areas. Now it is time to answer the second question, the shape. What is a cloud? The technical description of a tool capable to easily handle large volumes of distributed information. The architecture of operating systems is the scheme of roles and capabilities, the recipes to follow for the manufacturer, the DNA for the standardization process. In a Russian fashion, each aggregation level, computer, group of computers or data center, and group of data centers or cloud is a different type of the very same architecture. Each type or stratum performs one stage of the distribution life cycle. Since there is a structure of dependencies throughout the stages of the same life cycle, the only way to successfully reach end goals is through a compact system that integrates all the stages. Perhaps the very few existing software and hardware manufacturing plants capable to produce a real solution should be packed in a new legal structure for the assembly, transforming eternal costs in hands of commercial markets to an investment plan for becoming a factory capable to supply information infrastructures with all problems solved out of the box. Mesosphere is a company that is developing a data center operating system by wrapping open source tools, many of them incomplete models, through a login structure. Security problems such identity for authentication is being investigated in other projects, such as Pareto. We all know that modern operating systems are very likely to get stuck, despite being designed according to Unix standards, achieved after huge investment, plenty of failures. The most robust, such as Solaris, rely on high-performance processors and devices, avoiding the inconsistent consumer production. Will all these open source efforts, incomplete and disaggregated, be capable to create the required manufacturing standards for efficient data distribution and encapsulation? In the hypothetical case that this wrapping of incomplete components produce standards similar to Unix ones, will performance structures be designed to efficiently run these standards, or should we rely on the inconsistent consumer market supplying patchwork infrastructure extremely expensive to maintain?
So in order to figure out what layers for you and play with them and discover them and manage these tools, because all of these things have their own life cycle. Your applications aren't the only things with life cycle. Your Mesos and your Docker and your Puppet, all these machines down at the bottom, they all have their own life cycle, and something has to manage those things. Otherwise, you're in a mess. Because these are basically the pets that are managing your cattle. Your cattle's up at the top. Each of these has their own little quirks. Some of them can be containerized, but not all of them. Some of them really need to talk lower level. Depends on the situation. So at Mesosphere, we work on the data center operating system, and this is sort of a wrapper for the operating system tools you need in the cluster. There is a kernel. Mesos handles your lowest level task process resource management. Then there's Marathon as the init system that handles your containerization and your scheduling of tasks. And then there's also a package manager that will install things. This isn't necessarily your application layer package manager. This is your framework layer package manager that lets you install all of these complicated tools clustered to whatever size you want. And then the tools that you install on top of it dynamically allocate up to as much resources as they need.
The articulation scheme, the recipes to follow for the manufacturing, is determined by core values for orchestration and choreography. In this case, logic and data provides an operating system scheme of roles as follows: creation, the kernel, the system core, spawn process and file values. The architecture can be located in operating system bibliography, such Solaris internals from Jim Mauro and Richard McDougall. Outbound control, identity, and parent identity are the keys to organize values in trees. Inline signaling. Values require authentication and authorization during the different stages of the execution: credential, command, and signal. In a Russian dual fashion, each stratum builds the very same roles and capabilities over different operation infrastructures. At computer level, devices, peripherals, and buses of each unit is the operation infrastructure to stand process and file values. Memory is used as middleware for signal change between processes. The operating system offers tools to control buses and devices. At data center level, the connectivity between computers and the access connectivity to the group of computers is the operation infrastructure that enables the group of machines to work as a compact unit, standing container and application blueprint values. A virtualized network or overlay work as middleware for signal change between containers. Virtualization and software-defined network tools control the operation infrastructure. At cloud level, interfaces and real-time connectivity is the operation infrastructure to apply schemes for data distribution and logic operation, standing services and repository values. A bus of events is used as middleware for signal change between services. BPEL, Business Process Execution Language, is used for the choreography of services, while development is based on reusable components paradigms, such microservices or SOA, services-oriented architectures. The famous Plato theory of ideas or theory of forms describes the basic principles of harmony, but the name is a phonetic translation of the Greek word eidos for idea. However, in the classical Greek, they very often exchange eidos for scheme. The eidos is a special kind of scheme, a scheme of roles that articulates life cycles. The most accurate translation of the word eidos is archetype or articulation scheme. So we can say that the Plato theory of archetypes or articulation schemes is the one that deals with the ordering laws that allow the creation of infrastructures. What Plato theory says is that a single scheme of roles organizes all the capabilities of an infrastructure. It works as a framework of recipes to manufacture any system. It's like the DNA of the infrastructure. Aristotle points out that these archetypes do not exist. They are like the mathematical equations, but for infrastructure. They describe a generic causality. For instance, mathematical circuits theory is used for electronic circuits, heat circuits, hydraulic circuits, and even mechanical circuits. They look like entirely different things. However, they obey the very same mathematical equations. Equations that are pure abstractions. They do not exist. Only each of the actual circuit is what we have. The same thing happened with these archetypes. We only have types, but all types follow the same articulation scheme in such different shapes that are absolutely impossible to recognize.
But Rome was still no different from many other prosperous cities of the Mediterranean. What first set it apart was not its capacity for trade or engineering or even warfare, but its ability to organize itself. The man who reshaped Roman society was an Etruscan king called Servius Tullius. There are no statues of him. We have no idea what he looked like. He never became as famous as later rulers of Rome, but his mark on history may be even greater. And yet, all Servius Tullius did was carry out history's first census.
Now, the Roman census, are a very important institution. They would count the Roman citizens, all right, and list them and then distribute them in their appropriate classes and political units and so on. The census was a kind of way of grading Roman citizens according to their status and prestige.
In the 6th century BC, the census detailed every Roman's obligations to the city, to obey its laws, pay taxes, and do military service. But much more important, it also gave them rights. This was the great innovation of Servius. In proportion to their contribution, Romans were given a say in how their city was run. Servius sowed the seeds of representational government. He organized an assembly to govern the city and gave it a name, the Senate. Finally, the census decreed that each of the city's social classes should contribute a group of soldiers for Rome's defense. They were called the legions, the fighting force that was going to put Rome's destiny back in its own hands and one day give it the world. The census didn't create equality or democracy. Rome remained a society governed by kings and nobles. Women had few rights. But it created a level of organization unheard of in the ancient world. No man did more for Rome than the Etruscan king Servius. His reforms laid the foundations for Rome's greatest achievement, the creation of the Republic.
And in the history of the human race, the creation of large empires has been fundamentally important, even though it's no longer fashionable. The creation of peace, the creation of law, order, the institutions of Senate, the creation of money, democracy, elections, voting, all these, even if some of them are only the perpetuation of the Greek tradition, have been fundamental in modern European culture.
With Rome's passing, the West's long love affair with its memory began. Paradoxically, it was the Christian Church that faithfully kept the language and culture of its former persecutor alive.
Simply walk into any church. In its architecture and design, you have just walked in to a Roman imperial palace. Sit down in that church and perhaps listen to the church service, listen to the liturgy, listen to the hymns. You are listening to Roman imperial court ceremonial. The structure of the buildings of the Christian church, its liturgy, its choirs, its priests, its bishops, are imitative of Roman imperial court ceremonial.
The great danger is that we believe that the Roman Empire was a good thing. That is a 19th century view. It's the reason why in Britain people learnt the classics. They learnt the classics and they read their Livy in order to know how to govern India, because Britain saw herself as doing exactly what the Romans had done. We have not yet properly written the post-imperialist history of Rome that will come and realize that this whole thing, great though it was, has its negative side. It has its violence, it has its dark side.
For both good and bad, the whole Western world has grown up in Rome's towering shadow. Nurtured on its stories, imitating its heroes, always trying to learn the lessons of its republic, its empire, and its fall. Rome, ruthless in its lust for power, insatiable in its ambition, revolutionary in its political ideals. Its soaring spirit has never died. Rome's power and glory have branded themselves on the Western imagination forever.
"200 years ago in Scotland, Adam Smith taught at the University of Glasgow. His brilliant book, The Wealth of Nations, was based on the lectures he gave here. The basic principles underlying the free market, as Adam Smith taught them to his students in this university, are really very simple. Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum.
For more than 3 centuries, it was trade, not conquest, which brought new colonies into the empire, though it was often trade at the end of a gun or a sword. Private companies run by speculators and the odd crook took over huge chunks of foreign territory. They ran them as they liked, raising armies, doing deals with local rulers. The East India Company was the grandest of them. Canada was opened up by the Hudson's Bay Company, which traded in skins and furs. And the African Lakes Corporation bought and sold the bounty of swathes of Africa. Most were accountable to men sitting in offices thousands of miles away. At the heart of empire was the City of London, the centre of a spider's web of global trade. This was where money was made, goods bought and sold. At the London Metal Exchange, they've been doing business in this way for over 200 years.
It all looks utter chaos down there, with people shouting and making strange gestures and talking into 2 or 3 telephones at the same time. But behind it all is an important clue about why Britain became such a powerful force in the days of the Empire.
On floors like this, traders speculated on tin from Malaya, cotton from India, wool from Australia, gold from South Africa. From the 17th century, Britain took the lead in global banking, finance and insurance. City bankers and merchants made London the pivot of the world's entire commercial system. And London held that lead well into the 20th century. By the end of the 19th century, more than half the world's trade was financed in British pounds. Victorian investors grew rich trading in things on the other side of the world, things they never saw or perhaps never wanted to see. Victorian Britain, in effect, had 2 empires, one run by politicians, the other by moneymen like Gibbs. In South America, British banks supplied governments with credit. British companies built railways across Argentina. British settlers bought huge ranches and raised cattle.
In order to practice their new faith in peace, Protestants from all over Europe emigrated to America. While South America remained in the conservative grip of the Roman Church, North America became the refuge for every persecuted sect, a promised land for a nation of immigrants, whose success would persuade them that they truly were, in a typically Protestant expression, a predestined people. A people chosen by God. Primitive capitalism was born in the Italian republics, where its vigor would not last. With the spirit of reform now allied to an austere puritanical Calvinism, which favored saving rather than spending, and therefore investment, modern capitalism would blossom in the Protestant lands of Northern Europe and America.
We may think power resides with presidents and prime ministers in palaces and parliaments. Not so. In today's world, real power lies in the hands of an elite group of unassuming men in anonymous open-plan offices. The men who control the world's bond market.
Bonds are the magical link between the world of high finance and the world of political power. Governments will always spend more than they raise in taxation, sometimes shed loads more, and they make up the difference by selling bonds that pay interest. But, and here's the magic, if you want to get rid of a bond, the government doesn't have to give you the cash back. You just take it to a bond market, like the one here, Tokyo Stock Exchange, and sell it.
After the rise of banks, the birth of the bond market was the next big revolution in the history of finance. It created a whole new way for governments to borrow money. The bond market funded the wars that plagued northern Italy 600 years ago. It dictated the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo and created the world's greatest financial dynasty. It ensured the defeat of the South in the American Civil War. And in modern times, the bond market has brought once wealthy nations, like Argentina, crashing to their knees. Today, governments and companies use bonds to borrow on an unimaginably vast scale. All told, there are bonds out there worth around $85 trillion. The fortunes of most of us, whether we like it or not, are directly linked to the bond market. If the bond market tanks, then down goes the value of our pensions. And that's a huge part of our wealth as individuals. The ability to finance war through the bond market was, like so much else, an invention of the Italian Renaissance. Rather than require their own citizens to do the dirty work of fighting, each city hired military contractors, condottieri, who raised armies to annex land and loot treasure from the others. This wonderful document in the Florentine State Archive shows how the city's debt had exploded from around 50,000 florins at the beginning of the 14th century to 5 million by 1427. It was quite literally a mountain of debt, hence the name, the Monte Comune. But from whom could the Florentines possibly have borrowed such a vast sum? The answer is right here, from themselves. It was a revolutionary idea that would change the world of money forever. Rather than paying direct tax, citizens were now effectively obliged to lend money to their own government. In return for these forced loans, they received interest. These debt instruments, simple lines in a ledger, were the original government bonds. And the wonderful thing about them was that if you needed your money in a hurry, you could sell your bonds to other citizens. They were liquid assets. What this record tells us is how Florence turned its citizens into its biggest investors. The bond market had been invented to help pay for Italy's wars. But now, it was setting interest rates for everyone. Its rise to power had begun. Over the next 2 centuries, bonds would come to rule the world.
Their scholars translated into Arabic the texts of ancient Greece and Rome, saved by the Byzantine Empire. Here we see one translating the sayings of Socrates, as set down by Plato, just reaching the famous passage, "Consciousness begins with understanding, so know thyself." Through these translators, the knowledge of Plato and Pythagoras has passed down to us today. Once they had absorbed all they could, Arab writers and scholars would add their own stones to the edifice of civilization.